Rob, welcome to Halloween Daily, where every day is Halloween. Thank you so much for hanging out and talking to us today.
Thanks so much for having me on, Matt. I really appreciate it. I love all the things you guys do over there, and I feeling you're a lot like me. We have probably around the same age. We probably have this very similar interests, and I could tell by the background of where you're sitting that we'd be one and the same.
Well, yes, you are definitely right about that. And as we're talking today, one of the main focuses we're going to be talking about is your new documentary, Dressing Up Halloween, and it's all about the story of Ben Cooper costumes. And and we were just talking before we officially began the interview about how that is just one of my own passions and just interests for many years, is in addition to just all things Halloween, and but Halloween history and especially vintage Halloween and all that good stuff. So always a pleasure when we can just talk just about every corner of Halloween from its history up to our personal interest in it. And so you're absolutely right. You are here among like-minded individuals, me being number one among them. So thank you again. Um, as I said, your documentary, it's all about the history of Ben Cooper, and it's really, all about Halloween's past. And that's where I like to start these interviews whenever possible. And I'm sure with you, you're gonna have some great stories from us. What is in your personal life your earliest memory of just Halloween itself?
That's a great question. It's hard to really for me to think back on one specific memory, but I can tell you it always had I always loved Halloween growing up. It was a chance for you to be someone else. It was a chance for you, no matter I guess what street you or lived on. You could live on a poor street, middle class, rich. That night, everyone was created equal, and everyone had the chance to go out there and be a devil, a superhero, a monster, whatever you want it to be. And I think a lot of my early memories come from wearing these types of costumes, the Ben Cooper costumes, and really getting a chance to, you know, bond a lot with my dad. Because my dad was generally the person that would take me outside when I was younger from door to door and go. So to me, it was producing this documentary and was for me a way to, you know, it was almost like a love letter to my childhood in a way. And it just thinking back on Halloween's past really gives me fond memories of bonding with my dad, going out there and trick or treating.
Absolutely, and that is, kind of the feeling you get watching the documentary. Is and you hit on many different eras. I we tend to talk about Ben Cooper as the Ben Cooper era, but of course, Ben Cooper, the company was around for many eras actually, and you talk about that in the documentary. But yes, it flashes me back to growing up, and again, I think when viewers watch it, whatever age they are, whatever decade they were in their preteen years, I guess, is kind of the vintage retro sweet spot there for a lot of us. I think whatever decade it was, this is going to bring back some of those warm, nostalgic memories, like you're exactly like you're talking about. Um, and I know this isn't your first project focusing on Halloween and the history of Halloween, and I know you and your wife run a horror convention, and so Halloween is just a big part of your life in general, aside from this particular project. So if you could sum it up today, like what does Halloween itself mean to you? I mean, again, we've grown up and seen it go and become huge in
Right.
over to where it is now. And I think for people like you and me, it was always pretty huge, but now it's just literally everywhere. And but what are your thoughts on that? If you had to sum it up, what does Halloween mean to you today?
So Halloween is super massive now. And as you mentioned, when we were growing up, yeah, it was filled the stores, the stores would change, but now it's just like this huge commercial giant. And but to me, it's I mean, not only Halloween, but the fall to me is so special. You know, I live in Connecticut, so we have the leaves changing up here, and it's a super beautiful time. And I'm super pale, so I always can't wait for the summer to be over anyway, because you know, it's just that's what it is. But yeah, to me, Halloween is just awesome. I love everything about it. It's to me, I guess it's almost I prefer, and even as a kid in a way, and it's kind of weird to think of it this way, I even preferred Halloween to Christmas just because it was more like active, you know what I mean? But yeah, I just think it's such a great time, and it's you know, one of the things I think that's overlooked about it is the you know, the bonding between the parents and the child that could happen around Halloween. You know, it's just a lot of fun memories to go out, and I think that's still represented pretty good this day with you know, even though we live in a condo currently, we only get maybe a few trick-or-treaters, which is super sad to me. If our doorbell rings twice, it's a big win for us. But yeah, I just think it just the love of the season for me is why I love it so much, and it's always been my favorite holiday. I get psyched as I drive by people's houses and I see them starting to be decorated. Like today, I was out, I had to come back home, I had to go out somewhere, and I see a lot of you know, leaves falling and giant pumpkins in front of people's house, and it's just a really special time of season.
Absolutely. And we always, you know, feel the same way, just like you're saying, as the temperatures finally start to cool just a little bit. And we live in a big summer tourist town anyway, so summer's real big here. But I myself, I'm just like you. I'm just, yeah, when it starts to cool off just a tiny bit, and yeah, the fall starts to blow in. Yeah, that's the best. Those warm Halloween vibes we're talking about. And like you said, how it's become so big, but it is such a family event, and it does often kind of get overlooked or maybe not mentioned as much as it could. I mean, I know my wife and our kids, you know, we can mark our family's history through our costumes. You know, it's like, well, that was Star Wars, and that was, you know, the Avengers, and that was Spider-Man, and you know what I mean? Like we and I know we're certainly not alone with that. You know, you look in so many family albums, and it's so many of them are the Halloween photos. So I'm right there with you on that. Totally.
It's a
Um,
really cool time capsule, you know, to look back
yes.
on. And you know, I've always said this, that I love like looking at videos or pictures of kids wearing those Ben Cooper costumes, because to me it's always been two things. It's always, I think, really cool to look at, like visually, and I think it's there's something almost creepy about it too, with those, like, you know, the dead eyes of the masks, you know what I
Yes.
mean? And so I guess, you know, I love horror, obviously, as you mentioned, so it's kind of like a twofold kind of thing for me.
And before we leave your personal Halloween in your life, uh, we always try to ask everybody whenever we get a chance, if possible, what is your favorite Halloween costume that you've ever worn? And it doesn't have to be Ben Cooper, but and also your favorite Halloween candy or treat.
Yeah, so I mean, I wore a lot of Ben Cooper costumes growing up. I was a wolf man. I distinctly remember um Godzilla. That was probably my favorite one as a
Yeah,
kid. So that was definitely my favorite. I think the Ben Cooper Godzilla. I would have loved to say that I had like the aliens costume that they put out.
yeah,
Unfortunately, I didn't. And I think those were super hard to come by. But yeah, but it would have to be Godzilla. That was a pretty awesome costume.
yeah. That is a good pick. How about your favorite Halloween treat?
You know what? It's very rare that we get this, and it's funny because my friends ask me, and they'll be like, "What? They've never even heard of this candy." And I think it also goes back to, like I mentioned earlier, about like bonding with my dad. So one of my dad's favorite candies was this candy called peanut chews. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it,
I
but
don't think so.
they're super good. I'm telling you, you need to like find them. It's basically like chocolate, or they come in, I guess they come in milk chocolate and dark chocolate, and it's like basically covered in nuts. And what I understand about this candy is they used to give them out, I want to say it was like in World War II, for like rations to the soldiers. But I love them, and sometimes I'll find them in like convenience stores, and I'll have to grab them. Do yourself a favor. If you see them next time, try it. I think they're, in my opinion, better than Snickers.
Oh wow, awesome. Well, that'd be right up my alley then. They're called, what are they called again?
Peanut chews.
Peanut chews. All
Yep, and
right.
it's shaped like a it's like they're little they're like it's basically the size of a regular candy bar, and they're little like each sectioned off pieces.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's really good. I'm hungry for some right now, actually.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely have to seek them out. Um, so moving into your current project with dressing up Halloween, and again, I mentioned that this isn't your first project of this genre, a documentary covering Halloween history and specific costume history, and Ben Cooper and other companies of the like. What is it about this section of Halloween, and also about the Ben Cooper company itself, that made you want to return to this, and this time focus solely on the Ben Cooper company in this documentary?
Well, that's a good question. So the first documentary I released was Halloween in a Box, and that was like zero budget. It was my first time doing a film, and it focused on Cooper, Helco, and Collegeville. And it did what I needed it to do, is get out there and tell a story of these companies played such a huge part in Halloween and people's lives growing up. And it came out, I was happy with the amount of people that loved it and watched it, but since that point, I started to get way more into video. I started making commercials for companies. I started making like business commercials for various industries. And so I wanted another shot at it, but this time I wanted to do it bigger and better. And so what I did is I knew I just wanted it to focus on Ben Cooper, because they were the most popular one of these companies that put out costumes like this. And even, if someone has a Collegeville or Helco costume, you'll see them listing it on eBay or something as a Ben Cooper costume, or the people may just call them Ben Cooper costumes just because they were the most popular. So with this, I had the idea of, since I wanted to do it bigger and better, I wanted to do the actual documentary from Ben Cooper's old facility in Brooklyn, New York. So the first thing I did is, of course, like try to get in touch with the people that own that now. And I was able to do that. That took maybe like a year to get them to agree to, like, hey, I want to come in and film. And so I was able to solidify that. The next thing I did is I got in touch with Ben Cooper's grandson, Joel. And then I went from there, because I knew that I wanted to tell the story of Ben Cooper and also the people that work in the factory. So the next part was probably the hardest part of this documentary, and it was finding people that worked at the company. And that was near impossible because, Cooper went out in the early 90s. So there was no LinkedIn back then where someone could say, I worked at Ben Cooper. Um, you know, very hard. This is going back 30, 40 years ago, for some people that are trying to remember other people's names that work there. And so that was very hard. It's the finding people that work there and then getting them to agree to do this documentary, or some crazy person that just calls them out of the blue and was like, hey, I'm doing a documentary on Ben Cooper. And they're like, okay, why do you want me there? It was because you worked there, and I want to hear your story. I want to hear what was Ben Cooper like? What was the factory like? And it was really interesting for these workers of Ben Cooper to know that they're just by them doing their job played a huge part in my childhood, because they were creating the stuff that I was wearing. And I think when I explained it to them that way, that type of way, they really understood what I was trying to do with this documentary. I wanted to hear their stories. I wanted to hear what was it like working there, in different stories about that. So it was really cool to get all these people to get back together. And one of the best parts for me was these some of these people haven't seen each other in 30 or 40 years. And it was just, they were 20s, 19, 20, when they were working together. And now it's like, oh my God, a whole lifetime passed by. Two of the guys that came actually used to play basketball together on their lunch break. And now they're like, older guys in their like 60s or whatever. And it was just great seeing, to step back and just really film them reuniting. I think that to me was probably my favorite part.
That was going to be one of my questions. What your favorite part of this process was making this film? And yeah, you hit a lot of what I really love about the documentary. Going back to the factory building, like you mentioned, kind of holy ground if you think about it for Halloween history. And again, just as a Halloween history student of history that I am, I'm always fascinated with all of this, and so that part was fascinating because I can't think of any other time where I saw somebody do that and actually go, to the factory and see what it is now. And then, yeah, you talked to these guys that worked there on the factory floor, saw these iconic costumes being created, helped, had a voice in the creation.
Right.
I mean, just fascinating stuff for me, just as a, like I said, a student of Halloween history myself, and just always learning and trying to catalog it as good as possible. And then of course you've got Joel Cooper, you mentioned, who's Ben's grandson.
Right.
How did you contact him? How did that all work out? And was he excited? I mean, he seems in the documentary to be very excited to be able to tell this story.
Yeah, so I had contact with Joel after the initial documentary I made, and
Okay.
I did get in touch with him saying, I really want to do one just on Ben Cooper, and he was excited to do it, and so that's how that came about. We flew him in. I told him what we wanted to do, and I had about 60 Ben Cooper. I think you could probably see it for maybe a few seconds in the actual film, but I had about 60 Ben Cooper costumes I brought along with me, and we put them all together and like place them almost like little scarecrows throughout the factory there. And so these former employees that came in could actually walk in and just kind of like take a look at these creations that they had a hand in creating. And something that didn't make the doc was we kind of finished off the second day by I had a cake prepared at a bakery in Brooklyn there, and it had the what was on the cake was Darth Vader Ben Cooper costume. So they were all like pretty excited to see that. It was pretty awesome. I mean, one thing I found out was um and just hearing these stories, that factory in Brooklyn was a place you would not want to be when it got dark outside at like the 70s and 80s. And now it's like completely redone. It's like there's a lot of like it's almost like a hipster type place. There's a lot of artists that have their setups. There's comic stores, there's bakeries, and it's all like basically a mini mall inside there. So the workers were like, I could have never imagined that where we used to work it now looks like this. So it was pretty amazing to see them come back. And one really cool thing we saw on the second day of shooting, and I have no idea how we missed it on the first day, was we were walking by, we were getting ready to go, and some of the workers looked in the window and they're like, oh my God, look. And you could still see tape that had Ben Cooper written on the windows from, had to be the 80s. And it was insane. We're like, oh my God, it's still there. And what was pretty cool, you mentioned that it was kind of like hollowed ground for for Ben Cooper and for Halloween in general. And I talked to the new owners of these buildings, and I let them know. I was like, hey, did you know that Ben Cooper, and a lot of them didn't really realize what a big deal Ben Cooper was. So they're considering constructing something which has, basically businesses of the past. From what I understand, Topps also had the baseball card company actually had their facility in one of the other buildings right next to Ben Cooper. So it must have been a super busy, factory setting.
Yeah. Oh man, that is just so fascinating. And in addition to all that, as you said, I mean, you feature so many of these great costumes themselves throughout the doc. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, you're using some actual archival footage, but then you've actually recreated some, and I imagine that's where the 60 costumes came into play, if I'm not mistaken. But can you tell us a little bit about that? How and where did you find the actual archival, and how much is? And then also, um, how'd you get a hold of all of these costumes today to use and kind of recreate what looks like? Because you're watching the doc, and some of it, I couldn't tell if like you shot it today or if it was actual archival footage. But yeah, can you tell us a little bit about how you put all that together?
Yeah, so that archival footage, especially the one I'm talking about, the one that's inside of Ben Cooper's factory. So that one was one that I've really searched years for. And I'm talking about years. I've looked for that footage because it was so important to me to get, you know, to see the machines that were making this
Yeah.
stuff, the workers that were making it. But, if you think about it, this was really back in a time where there were no phones that had cameras on them. It was very difficult to get, a video camera and come in. And why would you be bringing a video camera into like your 9 to 5 job, Because
Right.
most guys, they just thought of this as their 9 to 5 job. So I finally, after years and years, tracked that footage down, and I was close to giving up on finding it, but I was like, oh my God, this is it. So I was able to get that. I was also able to get a bunch of footage from people that I met that have YouTube videos of them within costumes from the 70s and 60s. But all that stuff is really difficult to get. And to kind of supplement that, I have a ton of Ben Cooper costumes. So I was able to, use some kids' friends or friends' kids, excuse me, to go ahead and wear these costumes and use that footage and implement it into the doc and adding like subtle effects on it. So it makes it look like it's from the 70s or the 60s and whatnot. But I think it came out good, and I think it adds a lot to the atmosphere of it.
Yeah, so a lot of these the ones that you shot, that's just from your personal collection. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Oh man, very cool. Because that was another part that I love, just getting to be able to see so many of them kind of, throughout and from the different eras, I mean, and you break it up into not just chronologically, but you go by different licenses sometimes once you get into the licenses, because
Right.
that of course is one of the biggest innovations that the company brought to the Halloween industry. And I don't think people today fully can realize it, what Halloween was like prior to everything being licensed under the sun
Right.
for Halloween merch. And I can't even hardly imagine it, except for again just being into this history of Halloween. I'm always researching it and always looking back at, like you said, at old footage and photos, and fascinated at what the popular costumes of the years were prior to when everything was licensed. So, can you speak a little bit about that? That's a big part of the documentary too, and a big part of Ben Cooper's the company's story is how they were one of the very at the forefront of licensing and also taking gambles on brands like Star Wars that weren't quite the Star Wars they are today back in the day. So can you talk just a little bit about that for anybody that it may not be aware of how ahead
Right.
of the time they were?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. And I think this goes back to why people know these types of costumes, no matter if they're made by College Valhalco or Ben Cooper, as Ben Cooper costumes, just because they basically ran everything in terms of licensing. They got pretty much every great license. So prior to licensing, everybody would be like a generic vampire, a witch, a cat, or whatever, and then, a princess. So what Ben Cooper did, he had the idea to make Halloween costumes based on licensed characters. So he was one of the first to license costumes from Walt Disney. So that was one of the first that, Disney products that got put out was Ben Cooper costumes. So now instead of a princess that a girl could be, she can now be Snow White or Cinderella. And that's huge because now it's like a known character. You're no longer a generic character. And then, once television really got into the swing of things, you had Davy Crockett come out, another Disney. And so all the boys were in it, and then, things just progressed from there. With the 60s, you had costumes like, the Beatles, and that right there was just a huge coup for them because the Beatles were known by everyone. They were like one of the most massive things, and they started putting out costumes of the president. And then, once you move into the 70s, to me, that was really the decade, because, you have Marvel and DC getting more costumes. You have Star Wars, of course. And then, from there, it just springboarded into the 80s with cartoons were just so powerful then in the 80s. You had He-Man, you had, it was nonstop. He-Man and Strawberry Shortcake and all those. I mean, I think one of really the only big licenses they didn't get that I could recall, probably two of them would be the Transformers in the 80s, and then at the end of the 80s would be the Ninja Turtles. But besides that, every other big license of cartoon or whatever was Ben Cooper. I mean, they had Indiana Jones, they had, it wasn't just, you could really be anybody from a comic book, a cartoon, or a movie, and there was a great chance that Ben Cooper was behind that.
And as you've kind of already hit on, I mean, I think that was a big part of what people of our generation and even before us and certainly since us for sure has really attracted us to Halloween is that we could, yeah, we can create our own and there's that, but you can become your favorite movie character or TV character or comic book character. And they were just such a huge part of that. And that's led so many of us to just like you mentioned, as we're kids, it's Halloween's everything, and it leads to, for some of us, for a life where Halloween never ends, in different ways.
Yeah,
So
it's really good. I mean, Joel Cooper really hit on
yeah,
this. Their artist, Frank Romano, he has such
oh
a
yeah,
distinctive style. And I was lucky enough to
amazing.
have his son in the documentary as well, who actually worked as a costume tester for Ben Cooper, because um, just thinking back on it, Matt, that these costumes were really only made for one night. So if you got through the night with no rips, especially in like the groin area in your
Yeah,
leg, then you were doing something right that night. So yeah, his Frank Romano's artwork was really amazing. And looking back at it now, it's like a pop culture. They're pieces of art. It's
yes,
almost like I think of it almost like a Bob Ross painting or something. You know what I mean? This is a piece of art from our childhood, from our era, and it really needs to be looked at as such. And I thought all of his stuff was really interesting. And one thing I found out in the doc is that um, I think a lot of people as kids, when they wore these costumes, they were like, well, why doesn't Darth Vader have like the box on his chest? Why is Vader's face on the chest?
yeah,
And, as we got older, I think I was like, oh, it's way cooler to have the face on the chest and just some corny box that Darth Vader has, right? But Joel told me that if and you probably remember this, Matt, that it was so hot wearing those masks that when we weren't going door to door, we'd have them on top of our heads. And Ben Cooper wanted the costume to be recognizable even when the mask was on the person's head. So you could see that's why Darth Vader's face is on the Darth Vader smock. So to me, that was really interesting stuff to learn a little more and to kind of delve deeper into that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like you said, I'm always interested and fascinated to learn more about just the history of Halloween and this industry, costume making, because now, with cosplay and everything, I mean, costume making is has never been bigger than it is now. And again, they were at such a forefront of that. And you might have just answered this question, but I was going to ask, what was the most surprising thing that you learned yourself in making this film?
I think well, we did touch on the what I had just mentioned in terms of the face on the smock, but something
Yeah.
else I would throw in there. In my opinion, I learned about what should be the most valuable Ben Cooper costume ever. So there was a mask just given to Ben Cooper workers, never for sale, of Ben Cooper. So an actual Ben Cooper mask. And they wore it during his birthday or something like that. So he walked in the factory and everybody was wearing this mask. And I've kind of scoured the internet looking for it, but nowhere to be found. But I do include a picture in there of the actual mask, and it was really cool. And I would love to eventually one day get one. And in my opinion, if you think about it, that has to probably be the the most desired Ben Cooper collectible that there is, because it was never for sale, and maybe I don't know, 200 ever made, 300, who knows? But yeah, so I would love to get one day. And I know there's a lot of talks about like the Marvel Spider-Man costumes that they have, which are very valuable. But man, I would take a Ben Cooper mask over that any day.
Oh man, that was literally going to be my next question to you. Was what is the holy grail of Ben Cooper costumes? And you just answered it. And
You know what?
yes,
I think that would be it. The tough thing is, it was never for sale. I think that's
yeah,
what makes it so popular. I just think that that's such a collectible to have. I really do. I mean, other than that, I mean, there are Spider-Man stuff, but to me, I really love the alien costume that they made. I mean, I'm always so close to pulling the trigger on it when I'm on eBay, but man, it's so expensive. But it's beautiful. And, it was really hard. That is the only costume they ever made that was from a rated R film. So that to me is another interesting fact as well. And it's really cool because if you think about it, like, you're how old wearing these costumes, like 5 to, I don't know, 11 maybe. I don't know, but you're probably not going to see many rated R movies during that time.
absolutely, yeah. And that is definitely one of the coolest, the alien one. And you're right. Back on the Ben Cooper mask. I mean, that was a revelation to me watching this. I had never heard about that before or read about that before this documentary, and that was one of the coolest revelations I found in it too. Like, oh man, that's pretty cool that they did that. And like you said, it was never for sale or anything. Because at the time, we weren't around yet, so people like us who would have cared and appreciated that, they just wouldn't have cared quite yet. But again, ahead of their time and didn't even know it.
You know what? I just wonder how many people just tossed it at when they went home that night,
Yeah,
or it's like it's crazy to think of like something that little. I mean, this guy was such an innovator. And what's crazy to me, Matt, is like so many people know the name, but we don't know the person. That's why I wanted to really showcase him in this documentary. I wanted to hear about Ben Cooper as a person. I asked
mm-hmm.
his employees that, of course, if you ask someone's family, they're going to say, oh, yeah, he's great or whatever. But I wanted to hear from the workers, and everybody said the same thing. Like, no matter who you are, what position you had, Ben Cooper would come up and say hello to you, like you were basically his equal. And from what I understand, back in that time, it was maybe harder for people of color to get jobs and stuff like that. But Ben Cooper really was like, we're going to be a family here. The color of someone's skin doesn't matter. if you're a good worker, you're always going to be here. So that's really what I learned about this, and the effect that he had on some of the people in the documentary is really cool to hear. I mean, some of them were kind of like, lost souls going to work here, and he really like helped them turn their life around and really instill a lot of values in them.
Oh, absolutely. And I loved hearing that too, because like you said, I mean, we know the name and we know the costumes and we know some of the history and the story, but hearing those firsthand accounts of the people that, like you said, the employees, the guys that were there and got to see him on a day-to-day basis of actually what he was like, and to hear that thankfully, they say never meet your heroes, but thankfully, it's all so great what they say and what you just described. It's all so great that it sounds like he was just a really great guy and just really looked out for his employees and that the whole family was in it for the right reasons, it sounds like,
Right.
and looked out for their employees, like you said, in a time where that not everybody did that.
Right. It was good to find that out. I mean, that would have been
Yeah.
really disappointing, with all the love people have for the costumes. And if you were to find out, oh, he was a terrible person. But
Yeah.
yeah, from what I understand, he would go around at night. He just loved Halloween so much. I mean, I could probably see myself doing something like this. He would go around and just, he'd drive on the street and just see what kids were wearing. Really got into, of course it was his business, but I think it also brought him joy, just to see that stuff. And that's really cool because I could see, myself, like I love to see kids come to the door, dressed up, and it's really cool.
Yeah, I love hearing that story too in the doc about him on Halloween night, taking that just that one night. That was the only night of the year, and I think a lot of us that live and breathe Halloween all year can relate to that. That in a lot of ways, it's like that's the day when everybody else is like all about where we can just kind of step back and take a rest for just a minute and breathe. And I love that story of him just driving around and seeing the costumes and probably also the businessman in him is also calculating, okay, which ones are trending, which ones are most popular this year, which ones am I not seeing enough of, and I'm sure there was that too. But yeah, I mean, I love that story, and just that he would just kind of take that one day and that'd be his time to soak it in and see the fruits of everything they had done.
Right. It's crazy to think that, your facilities running 365 days a year really just based on one day. That's insane if you think about it, you know what I mean? But it's really cool, everything that they were able to do. And one of the other cool things that we were able to talk about in this was like the wigglers or jigglers that they made too.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, of course everybody thinks of Ben Cooper with the costumes, but this was, as a kid, I had like those little things on the string, and it was pretty cool because I remember having like Spider-Man and Batman. It helped move them into a different space while still being Halloween related. It helped them move them into a place in retail, stores where they would be considered almost action figures. So their name and brand would be out there, year
Mm-hmm.
round.
And just like you mentioned earlier, I mean, again, people forget that they were literally at that time, nobody was thinking of them as being a collectible or even being worn again after that one night. So they weren't making them to last. It wasn't like, they were built to last and didn't. They just weren't making them like that. And so the fact that any of them have survived to now is a miracle in itself. And if you think about it like that, I mean, and I think a lot of people forget about that, but created for one night, one use for the most part.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, it's I think like as you go through your daily life, you're like, all right, I don't need this anymore, and you throw it out. And like, who would ever think of keeping a kid's? Because really, let's be honest, you couldn't wear these year after because they were probably ripped after
Right.
your one night of wearing them, or the elastic band on the mask would snap off. That was always a classic thing. So it was generally like parent would be like, well, what am I going to do with this? I'm just going to, and they were so cheap to buy for parents. I think they were, when we're talking 70s and 80s, probably between like $3 to $5. So it probably wasn't that much. And so like, well, why would I just keep this around the house? I'll just get a new one next year. So it is really interesting to see all of these that survived. If you look on eBay, you could see the collector markets out there now, and it's going crazy.
Absolutely. Yeah, the collectability is insane, and now we've got other collectibles. Like, I mean, I know you've seen NECA and Super 7 have the figures out now that are wearing
Right,
classic Ben Cooper
right.
costumes. It yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Of course you've got it right there. Um is the Ben Cooper mask your personal favorite as well? Because I was going to ask that. That I know that's the holy grail, but is that also your personal number one favorite?
That's a great question. I mean, there are a few that I really like. Yeah, I mean, I guess a short list would have to be I like the Godzilla. I love the alien mask. I love the Wolfman mask from the 60s that they have. I think probably those three would be my favorite, but I'm also into like, believe it or not named. I really enjoy like witch costumes as well because I think the faces are super creepy on them. So those are kind of up there for me as well. But if I had to probably narrow it down to a list, that would probably it. I'm not sure what else I'm missing. I mean, I have a ton of costumes back there, but that would probably be it. I also like the I guess like the generic skeleton ones that they would have as well. They were pretty cool as well.
I like all those that you just listed. Yeah, yeah, those are all great. Um, and I know you're always working, as we mentioned, on your horror convention and all. And as we're recording this, this film just came out on digital platforms. But what's upcoming? Do you have your next upcoming film project in the works yet that you could talk about, or
So I have a
what
few
else do you
things
have?
in mind.
Mhm.
I have a short horror film that was written up, and because of this Ben Cooper doc got delayed a bit, we haven't had a chance to really shoot it yet. But I have that. I also have a kind of a docu series which I'm working on, but it has nothing to do with like Halloween or horror. But that's I'm hoping to start shooting that soon, be able to announce some things. But yeah, I was super happy to finally, get this Ben Cooper documentary out there and teaming with Nacelle. I mean, they're such a good company because they do the toys that made us, and this kind of was right up their alley. From what I understand, they had, some people request a Ben Cooper episode of the toys that made us, and they're like, oh, well, we have, one better. We actually have the documentary dedicated to that, which was shot in the facility. Um, but it was really cool. It's I really hope that fans will take a look at this and see the history of the company and check out the all those kind of vintage videos. And it's to me that's uh that's a really cool thing to do. See those old grainy videos on the screen, and it kind of lets everyone think about Halloween past.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a fantastic watch for this Halloween. I think a lot of people like ourselves are going to put it on future Halloweens as well, and just take that walk down Halloween past memory lane. Um, Guys, it's called Dressing Up Halloween. As like I said, as we're recording this, it's out now on digital platforms. I've seen it. It's awesome. You guys, I know our audience is going to love it. And especially, if you grew up and are old enough to remember actually wearing some of these costumes, which I am. I'm telling my age now, but like you, I am old enough to remember, wearing a few of them, and certainly just growing up and them being such a part of our culture. And now with Halloween Daily News, I mean, it's such a part of my life, just covering the Halloween industry and knowing where Ben Cooper really was at the forefront of all of this at a time when Halloween was not a commercial thing, and yet they were there, and in many ways helped keep it alive and help it become what it has become in America, which is kind of this Frankenstein combination of all of these other Halloween traditions, ancient traditions from all of these other cultures. And in America, I always say ours is kind of the best because we've taken a little bit from all the other cultures and how they celebrated ancient Halloween and made it our American Halloween, and then Ben Cooper with the licensing and everything they did, making it accessible, was just kind of like the cherry on top. So yeah, this has just been awesome. And again, I know our HDN audience is going to love it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt.
And again, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. And of course, we're going to wish you just a very, very happy Halloween this year.
Same to you, Matt.